All right, hi guys, welcome back to week 2. So this week we're going to introduce a concept, the concept of organization design, and we're going to look in particular at some of the more traditional strategies of organizing. So we'll look at some organizational structures, enhance some of what we read about in the text in terms of ways that we organize, and over the next couple of weeks we'll look at different ways of structuring and organizing. In particular, I want us to really look at how the organization's design predicts or impacts certain kinds of interactions and communications. Remember last week we talked about that kind of top-down, bottom-up perspective, and the idea here is that we create an organization design because we hope that it streamlines, it produces certain kinds of interaction and communication. I want us to really question the idea about whether today's organization designs are up to that task, and what the choice of organization design means for the kinds of interactions that you see inside that organization. So let's look first at what we mean by the idea of org design. I'll introduce this time some very traditional kinds of organizational structures, and then we'll really look next week at maybe how those structures aren't quite, they enhance some of what the traditional forms of organizing are. So what do we mean by organization design? Organization design is defined as the deliberate process of configuring an organization's structure, processes, reward systems, and people practices to create an effective organization capable of achieving the business strategy. This probably sounds a lot like one of those systems theory models we talked about last time, right? So here we're really looking at some of these different concepts and how they all need to together in order to have the organization accomplish its ends. And we have to remember, though, that, again, that other kind of bottom-up perspective, organizations are not ends in and of themselves. They're vehicles to accomplish tasks. Organizations are designed for a purpose. Many, maybe most organizations, though, inhibit the accomplishment of tasks by providing barriers to getting work done. Sometimes those barriers are structure barriers. And smart people figure out how to get around those barriers, right? You know where the stumbling blocks are in your organization, and you know how to get things done, but you probably end up spending a lot of extra time and effort in getting things done. So a lot of organizations then decide to choose a new organizational structure, but they don't always try to redesign, and so they notice little performance improvement. Most organizations spend too much time on the traditional strategies of organizing. They spend too much time on the structure and on the organizational chart, and not enough on some of those other aspects that we'll talk about in the next couple of weeks. So I'm showing my hand a little bit here by also pointing out that some of these traditional strategies of organizing that have been around in some cases for hundreds of years aren't quite working for the contemporary organization, and we'll look at that here in a bit. I want to do a brief history of org design so that you understand that where some of these concepts came from and why they're so pervasive today, even though they may not work for us anymore. You may be familiar with the idea of Frederick Taylor or Taylorism. You'll have read in the book about time and motion studies. Frederick Taylor was one of the first to say, hey, we should break up the organization into different specialties. So we should divide up people who make shoes into the person who cuts the leather, then another person who puts the holes in the leather, another person who does the stitching, the final person who does the polishing. Right? You take each piece of the process and have a different person do it so that they can specialize in that and be an expert. And he's one of the first to come up with that whole idea of the sort of methodical organization. He also said that every worker should have a different kind of boss. So there wasn't just one kind of leader in his day, that there should be a boss who specialized in organizing the methods by which people work. The person who schedules, the person who works at administrative, so he has 8 different specialties of what he called foremen at the time. Another scholar, Henri Fayol, at the time came up and said, this multiple boss thing is ridiculous, people are really confused by it, and he comes up with 2 concepts that I think you will recognize. Unity of command, so he has a rule that all employees should have one and only one boss. He also divides up what he calls line and staff roles. Line roles have authority. Staff roles basically have no authority. Staff roles are the experts who do the work, and basically line managers are the ones who tell them what to do. But think back to the organizational structures at the time. We're talking again here, 1850s to 1900s, 1920s. They're going to be railroads, telephone companies, steel mills, etc. Most organizations are built in a very kind of functional structure way, and in fact, many companies at the time had maybe a president, a finance person, and some workers. So there wasn't a ton of additional work, and even railroads at the time were went a fairly short distance, and one person could typically manage all the activities of a 50-mile stretch of railroads. So, but then as the organizations begin to grow, as they become more complicated, imagine railroads go coast to coast. Now we need to start to have different kind of local departments. We need to actually divide up the work in different ways because it can't be done all in one place. In the post-World War II era, we start to look at some of the more kind of theoretical knowledge about how organizations are functioning. Military leaders start to bring back their experience with hierarchy to organizations, showing how efficient they could be if they were just made more hierarchical. If certain people decided, made all the decisions, and other people executed those decisions. So, in the post-World War II era, though, businesses begin to grow, and many organizations of the time in the 1950s, you can see 85% of Fortune 500 companies used a very common functional structure, and still good and effective for simple organizations. But they begin to diversify. They begin to add more product lines. They begin to create new divisions. And so by the 1970s, when we really start to see more global competition, many organizations are much more diversified and much more complex. They offer multiple different kinds of product lines, and even the kind of GEs and Whirlpools of the era are building both light bulbs and washing machines, so that they have different divisions for different tasks. In the kind of late 50s, 60s, 70s type era, organizations start to become more global. They start to now create global offices. They start to sell to global customers. So a former kind of domestic structure where you have a headquarters and maybe some different field offices throughout the US now doesn't help anymore. So you see this growth from traditional functional structure to a product structure to a global structure. And I'll talk more about what those ideas are in a minute. And we see a lot of academic interest in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with the ideal organization design. There's this search for how can we create one perfect organization design that applies to everyone. And it turns out that doesn't exist, that the organization design ought to come from the strategy. According to Alfred Chandler in his 1962 book, he starts to say, look, the structure of the organization should be influenced by its strategy. If you're a multinational organization, you're going to need a global structure to match. And different researchers, including the father of organization design, Jay Galbraith, start to come out with some books about organization design. So what we've learned is that traditional strategies of organizing basically are organized by kind of a couple of different ideal types. And by ideal type, I just mean the kind of common approach. If you boil it down, you'll see versions of this likely in an organization you've been a part of or worked in too. So I want to cover a couple of these: functional, geographic, product, and customer structure. A functional structure consists of different divisions organized by function or major line of work. So different specialties exist within that structure. So you'll see maybe you have an IT department, a sales department, HR, finance, product development, etc. So all people who work in finance work in that same grouping. this helps to have people kind of aligned on some common processes. People have a common language. There's a career path. There's a lot of different advantages of the functional structure here when people are working organized in these nice groupings and lines of work here. Another example of a structure is a geographic structure organized by physical location. Maybe your sales organization is organized by different continents where people work, or maybe you have a work at a university where there are different whole different divisions based upon different geographic offices. So you can see different examples here where people work in different offices and everything is kind of co-located in that same geography. A third example of a structure, of a traditional organizational structure, is a unit structure, also called a product structure. In a product structure, the organization likely has several different kinds of products. So you can imagine a technology company that creates PCs and laptops and printers and software, right? So those are all different kinds of products, and each one of those products might have its own engineering group or purchasing group, an IT group. It might have its own finance group. It might have its own marketing group. So a kind of self-contained business usually within those different product lines. A fourth example of a traditional organizational structure is a customer or market structure. In a customer or market structure, different divisions are organized by market segments of the population. Typically, we sell to these different customers, so these are different groups of ours. So maybe we have a product line that we customize for different corporate customers, maybe large billion-dollar companies. Maybe we have a different set of products or priced differently, or a service that we price differently for small and medium business. And maybe we offer some of our products to the general consumer market, and we offer it directly or sell it on our website. Maybe we have an international division that offers a particular customized version of our product for customers outside the US, for example. So we divide up our company by the different kinds of markets that we serve. Maybe there's a marketing group for a college, for a textbook publisher, and they organize by the different buyers of their books. Maybe the K through 12 market, maybe they market differently for colleges, different for professional and technical buyers. So again, we're organizing what we do by the type of buyer that we serve. These are just some of the different examples of traditional organizational hierarchies and organizational structures, and you see how these hopefully are examples of those traditional structures that we read about in the text, about creating kind of formal mechanisms for the division of work, division of labor, how in each of these dictate kind of how decision making happens, how communication patterns happen. There's expectations in each of these traditional structures for where the work is located and how people work together. In the coming weeks, we'll look at the idea that these traditional organization designs are sometimes too slow, are sometimes too traditional, and they inhibit the organization from, in many cases, more effective innovation, more effective customer service. So Jay Galbraith wrote, in fact, more than 15 years ago now, the business world has changed. The solutions to many of today's issues have their roots in new organization designs. So we'll start to look at how some of the pros and cons of these different traditional ways of organizing in our discussion this week. And then in the coming weeks, we'll really look at how we can adapt some of these traditional forms and look at some new ways of organizing too. So we'll enhance some of our knowledge this week with some other relational network and cultural strategies of organizing to again enhance some of these traditional structures.